Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Mu'mineen, I would like to invite Brother Hassan Nayani for the recitation of Holy Quran and then the recitation of a Marsiyah. Bawaz buland salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
الرحمن الرحيم إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. خوشنودی امام زمانہ بلندتر صلوات. اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد. کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ جس کی دہلیز پہ جھکتے تھے انبیاء سارے، تو نے اس در کو جلایا ہے؟ کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ جو بھی بولے قرآن بن جائے، میرے بابا کی بات کا لوگوں، اس کو ہذیان کا سنا کر غاصب منبر نے دیکھ تحریر کو جھٹلایا ہے؟ کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ ہائے پہنا کے رسنیس یہ پھراتے رہے علی کو تیری سند کے ٹکڑوں کو فاطمہ تیری نے سنگ حسنین کے اٹھایا ہے، کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ ایسا بدلہ لیا مباحل کا کلمہ گو نے تیری بطول سے یوں، مجھ کو ہے زخم دیے ایسے بے حیا فاسق نے، ہاتھ پہلو پہ میرا آیا ہے، کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ دیکھ کر ہو گئے حیران وہاں، فاطمہ کی ضعیفی دیکھ علی، دن سے رات ہو گئے تھے سیدہ روئی، مجھ کو تو کہہ کے بلایا ہے، کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ جس کی دہلیز پہ جھکتے تھے انبیاء سارے، تو نے اس در کو جلایا ہے، کیوں مسلمان تو نے بعد محمد زہرا کو ستایا ہے؟ بر محمد وال محمد صلوات۔
جزاک اللہ برادر حسن۔ پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، کیا حال یہ امت نے زہرا کا بنایا ہے؟ Scholars, elders, brothers and sisters in faith, Assalamu alaikum. My condolences to all Mu'mineen on this very sad occasion. May Imam Zamana Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil Farajahu, accept our condolences. Shortly, the Sheikh will ascend the member, but a few announcements before that. We have some upcoming events and programs together with the Dallas Youth Group. one of which is the Coffee and Donuts with Sheikh. That is tomorrow at 3 p.m. and it is open to brothers and sisters ages 18 through 28. We also have a Scouts 1499 event, the family movie night, coming Friday, January 14th at 6 p.m. This program is free for all Scouts members and it is open to all Mu'mineen for a reasonable fee. CFK has also arranged for Chai with Sheikh Mahdi. This is an event organized by CFK and the topic will be inshallah interacting with non-mahrams in the professional world. This program is open for brothers and sisters ages 30 and above and is scheduled inshallah for January 15th at 4 p.m. The Dallas Youth Group has also arranged a resume and career search workshop for all young brothers and sisters. This is to help them set out a attractive resume and to help them with getting new jobs and internships, etc. Inshallah. This program is scheduled for Sunday, January 16th at 3 p.m. As always, details of when and where these programs are and registration, all these details are available on our WhatsApp group and our website, cfkdfw.org. Also, please note, with the uptick of COVID-19 cases due to the Omicron variant, we request the community to continue observing safety protocols. Please wear a mask, practice social distancing, and continue the use of hand sanitizers when attending any and all in-person programs, inshallah. Jazakallah to all our sustaining members, donors, volunteers, and program sponsors for your contributions that are helping CFK's vision come to fruition and enabling us to serve the community's social and religious needs, inshallah. For information on how to become a sustaining member, please contact our membership director, Brother Asif Patel. And for opportunities to donate and sponsor programs, please join the CFK WhatsApp group or visit cfkdfw.org. We are always looking for volunteers and who can help behind the scenes, brothers and sisters who are interested in reciting poetry, nohas. For those who are willing, please contact me, Brother Mazhar Abbas, Brother Asad Jafri, or any of the existing volunteers. Let us now recite a Surah Fatiha and 3 times Surah Ikhlas for the marhumin of tonight's program sponsors. Marhum Sayyid Zahir Haider Zaidi, son of Sayyid Raghib Ali Zaidi. Marhuma Raisa Zaidi, daughter of Sayyid Muhammad Idris Zaidi, and the marhumin of Brother Munis and family. Marhuma Sabiha Nur Hussain Jafri, who was the Mutawalliya of Hazrat Abbas Ashur Khana in Hyderabad, India, mother of Brother Hussain Jafri, and the marhumin of Brother Hussain Jafri and family. Marhum Sayyid Muhammad Azhar Zaidi, son of Sayyid Saeed Ahmad Zaidi. Marhuma Anjum Abbas, daughter of Sayyid Zafar Abbas Rizvi, and the marhumin of Sister Noveen Fatima and family. Marhuma Muhaddisa Khatun, daughter of Sayyid Ghulam Mahdi, mother of Brother Asad Jafri, and the marhumin of Brother Asad Jafri and family. All our marhumin and the marhumin of the Ummah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I would now like to request the Sheikh to please ascend to the member. Bawaz-e buland salawat.
صل على محمد وآل One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. الله محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم، تراهم ركعا سجدا يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا، سيماهم في وجوههم من أثر السجود، ذلك مثلهم في التوراة ومثلهم في الإنجيل، كزرع أخرج شطأه فآزره فاستغلظ فاستوى على سوقه يعجب الزراء ليغيظ بهم الكفار. وعد الله الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات منهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Tonight, inshallah, we will continue with the topic of the lives of the Sahaba of our beloved Prophet. Last night, we had the opportunity to discuss the glorious life and legacy of the famous companion of the Prophet, whose name was Jundab ibn Janada, also known famously as Abu Dhar. And we said that these days and nights that we are going through, the days and nights of Fatimyah, are always a reminder of the status and the perspective that the two schools of thought within Islam have as it relates to the Sahaba of the Prophet. In the Sunni school of thought, the Sahaba are held at a very, very high status, a lot of respect, a lot of dignity, and in many ways they are given this stamp of approval based on their understanding of the verses of the Quran, based on their understanding of the ahadith of the Prophet. Anyone who falls within this category of sahabi or ashab of the Prophet, he is given this type of a stamp of approval. This person will eventually make his way towards heaven. If he does wrong things here or there, at the end of the day, this is not a bad person. You cannot accuse this person of trying to go against the Prophet, against the divine plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, there might be some shortcomings here or there. There might be sins that they commit. But at the end of the day, they are not bad people. You cannot say this person is an evil individual. And we said that the stamp of approval is not given to these individuals within the Sunni school of thought simply because they spent time with the prophets. No, it is because the Prophet himself, based on their understanding, is giving them the stamp of approval. This was one major misunderstanding that we said Shias have as it relates to the Sunni school of thought and their understanding of the status of the Sahaba. There are also misconceptions on the other side as well. This is one point I forgot to address to a certain extent yesterday. And that was this, that amongst the other side, sometimes when you listen to scholars from the Sunni school of thought, they will say, yes, the Shia are those who, when it comes to the Sahaba of the Prophet, they only respect 4 to 5 of them. Well, you ask how many Sahaba of the Prophet were there? They will tell you it's in the thousands. Because if you're defining a Sahabi as someone that has simply met the Prophet while he was Muslim and left this world while he still remained on his faith, how many people do you think did Hajj with the Prophet during his final Hajj? How many people were with the Prophet from the time he was in Mecca, then he came into Medina, Bay'atul Ridwan, all of these events that took place? Based on this definition, even if someone comes and spends a day with the Prophet and leaves this world while he is still Muslim, he falls under the category of Sahaba. Therefore, Sahaba, there are thousands of them. So this is a misconception that only 4 or 5 of these Sahaba are Sahaba that in the Shi'i school of thought are respected. There are more points about this. Inshallah, we will discuss these as I move on to the topic today. And today, of course, we're going to be discussing the life of the great companion of the Prophet, if not the greatest of all, after our beloved Imam, Salman al-Farisi, or if we wanted to be more precise, Salman al-Muhammadi, salawatullahi wassalamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj. And we will discuss his life by posing the following questions. Number 1, who was this man that we refer to as Salman? What was his real name? Because Salman was not his real name. What was his real name? And how did he become a Muslim? What was his journey to reach Islam? Number 2, how did the Prophet free Salman from his slavery? Number 3, what role did Salman play in the multiple battles that he played the role of a consultant for our beloved Prophet? Number 4, which characteristics did Salman embody that you and I can learn lessons from for our day-to-day lives? Number 5, which of the Sahaba promised Salman that he would be there to do the ghusl and kafan of Salman, even though he was very far away from where Salman was when he was passing away? And number 6, and finally, what did Salman say in his final moments, and which teaching of the Prophet was it that even in those final moments he used to remind himself of? These are the 6 questions that tonight we will delve into. The 6 questions that tonight we will delve into with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. Allow me to begin from here. This, of course, was a point I was planning to mention last night. It just slipped from my notes. This idea that, yes, within the Shia school of thought, there's just 4 or 5 of these Sahaba they care about. The rest of them are all terrible people. This is not what we hold in our perspective. Yes, when you look at the issue of Khilafah that came up after the Prophet, yes, there are many Sahaba who we believe weren't on the right side of history. This is the belief of the Shia school of thought. But the Sahaba of the Prophet as a whole, when you speak of their number, it's not 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 who were in Medina, for example, who were well known. No, the Sahaba of the Prophet were in the thousands. There's so many that even within the Sunni school of thought, historians, they struggle to put a number on it. Because how many people came and saw the Prophet? It's a very difficult thing to be able to estimate. If the Prophet is giving a khutbah one day, and people come and they listen to his khutbah, and maybe they ask him a question and they leave, they are Sahabi now. But who's keeping count at this point? Thousands of people fall under this category of Sahaba. So is it fair to say then that within our school of thought, only 4 or 5 of them are respected? The rest of them, na'udhu billah, they are terrible people. This is not what we believe. So many of the Sahaba of the Prophet, they lost their lives before it even came to the issue of Khilafah. In different battlefields, in different wars that the Prophet went to. The Prophet went to many, many wars. Especially those first 5 to 6 years that the Prophet had migrated to Medina, these were years in which there were multiple battles that the Prophet had to deal with. They say these 5 or 6 years were the 5 or 6 years where the Prophet was pretty much defending himself in Medina. He was establishing a government, but the kuffar didn't want to even give him that opportunity. So these Sahaba who gave their lives in the path of the Prophet, before it even came to Khilafah and all of that kind of stuff, what are they bad people? No, they're wonderful people. They're better than you and I. These are Sahaba that we highly respect. Then you say, okay, what about all the other people, all the other Sahaba that the Prophet had who weren't in Medina during the time of Khilafah? They also are all wonderful individuals because in reality they had no say as to what's happening in the city of Medina. When the Prophet passed away, Islam was not just Medina. Islam was the whole Arabian Peninsula. And the people who were part of this Arabian Peninsula, not all of them had any role to play as it relates to who is going to become the next Khalifa. No, Medina was the capital. Medina was the focus. If you were in Medina, maybe you had a shot at playing a role as it relates to this issue. And not even everyone in Medina. Some people in Medina were able to play this role because you had to have an elite position to be able to say you agree with Ali ibn Abi Talib or you don't agree with Ali ibn Abi Talib, or if Fatimah is going from door to door and asking people to give bay'ah to Ali ibn Abi Talib, that you're going to support her or not support her, your opinion doesn't matter unless you are an elite companion of the Prophet. So thousands of these Sahaba of the Prophet who came and saw the Prophet and they left. Many of them might be in Mecca, they might be in Ta'if, they might be, part of other tribes, sprinkled throughout this Arabian Peninsula. These are all terrible people? No, who said that? Many of them are also people who they won't even be held accountable for this issue. This is a historical issue. And this is part of the reason why, this question is always brought up, that the issue of Khilafah and the issue of Ghadir, why was it brought up after the Prophet left Hajj? Because Ghadir was on the way back. Prophet had already left Hajj. Sometimes people say, why did he wait until after Hajj? Hajj is your opportunity. Hajj is where you have the most people, which is true. In Hajj, the Prophet had thousands around him. And in Ghadir, he had thousands, but there is no doubt historically that you had more people during the Hajj than afterwards, because afterwards people are naturally dispersing at that point. Why? You say, why didn't he speak about it in Hajj? He's going to speak about it in Hajj for what? The people who come for Hajj, only those of them who are in Medina, only those of them who have elite positions, they are the ones who matter at the end of the day. This person who's coming from some tribe in the Arabian Peninsula, what role is he going to play in this issue of Khilafah? He's not going to play any role in this issue of Khilafah. It's not like back in the day you had votes and you cast your vote and then they take all the votes of the Arabian Peninsula. It's not how it worked. You had this elite position in Medina. Yes, that small group of Sahaba, who in terms of number are very small if you think about it, who played a role and knowingly turned away from the Ahlul Bayt, yes, we believe that they wronged the Prophet. We believe that they will be held accountable. And other schools of thought have a different understanding, and we respect them as Muslims, and hopefully they respect us as Muslims as well. But this idea that only 4 or 5 Sahaba they care about, the rest, na'udhu billah, they're in hellfire. Who said this? This is a major misconception. Recite a salawat, please. Moving on to one of the most well-known Sahaba of the Prophet, and that is an individual known as Salman. Salman, of course, was not the true name of Salman. Salman was a name that was simply given to him. Because we know that Salman came from a background, and this background was not even an Arab background. He came from the land of Persia. Where in Persia and where in today's Iran, because Persia was far greater than today's Iran. Parts of India were part of Iran, part of Persia at that time. Parts of Pakistan were part of there. Parts of Afghanistan were part of this Persian empire, the Sassanid Empire. This is a huge empire. This is a world power. For thousands of years they ruled these countries, yes? But we know that he came from what is today's Iran. Which part of it, there's dispute about it, and I don't want to spend time on that because that doesn't really matter for us too much. Some people say from Ram Hormuz, some people say from an area near Isfahan. Either way, we know that that is where Salman was coming from. And as far as, you look around, you find that he might be the only Persian Sahabi. He might be the only Persian individual who had the opportunity to spend time with the Prophet, and not just spend time 1 or 2 days, but as long as he did. It's interesting, the Sahaba of the Prophet, each one of them, that inner circle of the Prophet, each one of them came from a different corner of the world. Yes, Bilal came from a different place. Salman came from a different place. Suhaib al-Rumi, he came from a different place. And you had, for example, Abu Dhar, who came, he was not from Mecca or Medina, he was from another tribe. Each one of them came from a different corner of the world, if you think about it. So Salman, of course, is born in Persia. This is where the story of Salman begins. And the ahadith that we have about Salman are very, very high. And that is why it may not be too much of an exaggeration to say after Ali ibn Abi Talib, if you want to go down ranks, it seems as though the next person you will come to is who? Is Salman. Why? Because the ahadith that we have speak of this idea. That the Imam said that faith has 10 levels. Abu Dhar is at the 8th level. Miqdad is at the 9th level. Salman is at the 10th level. This is a person who his faith is pretty much complete at this point. Where does the story of Salman begin? Salman is born from a noble family in Persia. He's not a normal person. He is born from nobility. In some ways, he's royalty. And of course, he says, and this is part of the conversation he had with another companion of the Prophet by the name of Ibn Abbas, in which he himself narrated the story of his life. He said, I lived in a very well-off family. My father was a very important person in Persia at that time. And I came from a very noble family. And because I grew up in such a noble family, my family used to keep me in the house. The same way they used to keep the women and the girls in the house. Back in the day, the girls, they didn't have so much of a social life, yes? Just sit in the house and that's it. He said he used to protect me the way he used to protect the girls in the house. Just pamper me, take care of me all the time. And because of that, I was not aware of what's happening in society. He provided a comfortable life for me and just told me, you just leave it at that. Until one day came, he was busy with something, and he asked me to go and take care of something. He was a dihqan. A dihqan is a person who owns a lot of land, and he has other people work on his land, and he reaps the benefits from that. He asked me to go and take care of something one day, and he told me to come back quickly because he cared so much for me, and he was so worried about me all the time. So I accepted, and I left the house. I took care of what I had to take care of, and on my way back, I came across a group of people who seemed to be worshiping. I didn't know what they were doing. Now remember, this is in the context of Persia. It's not in Mecca or Medina, this is Persia. So I came across these people who were worshiping. I didn't know what they were doing. I came to them. I said, what are you doing? They said, we worship God. I said, which faith are you? They said, we are Christian. And it seems as though the Christianity that Salman was exposed to was different from the Trinitarian Christianity. It seems as though it was closer to the true roots of monotheism. He likes what he sees, and he starts to worship with them. Until night comes, and now he's running late because the father had told him, you come back immediately. He starts to make his way back towards the house. He enters into the house, and the father is very worried. He says, where were you? I told you to come back immediately. He said, well, I went, and on my way some things happened, and that's why I'm late. He said, what happened? He said, I came across these people. They call themselves Christians, and they are not Zoroastrians the way you are. Because Zoroastrianism, different religion altogether. Probably one of the rare religions in the world that believes in divine duality. There's a source of good in the world, there's a source of evil in the world, and these two have conflict with one another, yes? And eventually, the source of good will take over the source of evil. They don't worship fire, this is a misconception, but fire is a representation of divine powers. And that's why every temple you go to, they will have fire in that temple. He said, I don't like your religion. I like their religion more than yours. And his father didn't like this at all. He said, no, our religion is better. This is the religion of your father and your forefathers. You have to follow it. And he continued to resist until at one point, his father imprisoned him in one part of the house. Maybe as a form of discipline, form of punishment. But when he had been speaking to these Christians, he asked them, he said, where is the root of this religion? They said, this has come from Sham, Syria, Palestine, those areas. So he says, one of the times where I heard one of the caravans was going to come and move towards Sham, I left that little area that he had allocated for me. I freed myself and I went with this caravan to the land of Sham. When I went to the land of Sham, I came across bigger churches. When I came to these churches, I went to one of them and I found that this is the root that they were talking about. This is where they have this priest, and this priest is leading the worship. And I sat with him. He said, this is the journey of Salman. He's looking for the truth. He's so thirsty for the truth. He's going from one place to another place. And this is just the beginning, by the way. He sat with the priest. The priest spoke of him about the religion. He said, this sounds a lot better than what we believe in. So he started to work with this priest. The priest gave him a place to stay, and he started to live there. Salman says, I continued to live with this priest for a while until he died. And I observed that while he was living, though he was a priest and he was quote unquote a holy man, every time people bring charity for the church, he takes it and hides it for himself. He doesn't put it for the church. He has his own treasure chest. He says when he died, people were crying, they were upset. They came and saw him. They saw his body. They wanted to bury his body. I turned to them. I said, listen, this guy's not as good as you think he is. He used to take your money, you know. He didn't used to pay it for charity. They wanted to hurt him. I said, who are you? How dare you speak like this about our priest? He said, I showed them where the treasure chest was. They took a look at the treasure chest. This is all our money. And if you work for the church and if you dedicated yourself for the church, you shouldn't be, gathering all this money for yourself. So they believed Salman. Then they replaced that priest with someone else. He says the second person who came in, the second priest who came in, he was a better person. He was abstinent from the dunya. And so I continued to worship in his presence. And I continued to learn about the religion under him until it came a point where he was also leaving this world. I turned to him. I said, okay, now you're going to leave this world. Where am I supposed to go now? Who am I supposed to learn from? He said, listen, this form of faith that we have, I don't know anyone else who has this form of faith except for a person in the city of Mosul, which is in Iraq. He was in Sham before. Now he's going where? He's going to Iraq. This is northern Iraq. He said, go there. There's a priest there. He has the belief that we have. Tell him that I've sent you. You can worship with him. You can learn from him. You can be his student, basically sit with him and learn from him. Salman starts his journey again. Now going from Sham to Mosul. Makes his way to Mosul, finds this guy, this priest who has the same belief as the last one. He stays with him as well. Good person. He is now leaving this world. He says, what am I supposed to do now? He says, there is another person. He has this belief. He is in Amuriya. Amuriya is now in Western Turkey. He says, that's where you have to go. Now he starts to make his way from Iraq to where? To Amuriya, to Turkey. And if you know the geography of that time, you know that now Salman, in his thirst for the truth and in his search for the truth, he's going from empire to empire. He's going from the Persian Empire now to the Roman Empire. You and I, if we switch cities, this is like biggest sacrifice, And I'm not saying it's easy. It's difficult. Sometimes I speak to people. I say, Sheikh, we have to move. Why do you have to move? Well, because I feel like, here, my children, I can't raise them properly. I feel like here, we don't have the proper services for our community. The Islamic education isn't what it needs to be. It's this, it's that. And you and I look at that, we say, this is a huge sacrifice. It's going from one city to another city. The same debit cards, you can use them. The same credit cards, you can use them. Everything is the same still. Salman is going from one empire to another empire. Think about it as one continent to another continent. Sacrifices we make very small compared to the sacrifices that the Sahaba of the Prophet made. This is why the Prophet used to speak so highly of his Sahaba, because they didn't get there easily. Went through a lot of sacrifice to get there. He goes to Amuriya. Over there, he starts working again. He says, during the time that I was working over there, I had the opportunity now to put together some cattle for myself. I worked, and I was able to save some cattle for myself. Again, this priest, his life is coming to an end now. It's older. And I turned to him, I said, well, who are you going to leave me to now? What am I supposed to do now? He said, listen, this faith and this belief that we have, this denomination, I don't know anyone else who believes in this anymore. It's like it's dying out. But I know of a land and a promise that we have been given in our denomination of Christianity, that in that land there is a man who is going to be chosen as a prophet. And you can go there and follow him. He's the next prophet. He says, well, this sounds good, but what are the signs that he has? How am I supposed to tell who the prophet is? He says, I will tell you some of his signs. He says, number one, this prophet, he will preach his message in a city where he is not from that city. He will migrate to a different city. That is when he will truly preach his message. Number one. Number two, his city is full of palm trees, date trees. You have to go there. Number three, this prophet, if you come to give him sadaqah and charity, he will not accept it from you. Charity for himself, he will not accept from you. But if you give him a gift, he will accept the gift. Charity, you've come to out of petty, no, I'm not going to accept it from you. Yes? But if you come to me to show me friendship through hadiyah, through a gift, he will accept it from you. And the last one is that on his back, between his shoulder blades, this is what Shia and Sunni have narrated this idea, that the Prophet had a mark, call it the seal of prophethood, had a mark between his two shoulder blades, on your back near the neck. Very small mark he had. So these are his signs. So now, what does Salman do? You think it's easy, right? This part of the story, you think, okay, well, it's all, downwards from here. No, Salman still has to go through trials and tribulations. He said, I took my cattle. I saw a caravan now going to the land of Arabia. Because he said palm trees, I knew that's where it was. And when you talk about Arabia, the major cities in Arabia at this time, there's only Mecca and Medina. Even Ta'if is like a very, very small village, you can even call it. Mecca and Medina. The rest is Yemen, which is in the south. That's it. He says, I asked this caravan that was going towards Arabia, I will give you my cattle, you take me there. But as they were taking me there, they all of a sudden decided to betray me. They took my cattle and they sold me as a slave. And when they sold me as a slave, this was very difficult for Salman. But he says, as we approached the city and now I was being sold as a slave, I saw the palm trees. And because I saw the palm trees, I kind of forgot about this idea that I'm a slave, that I'm a servant, that I'm not free anymore. It's like, that's my only condolence now. That's my only thing that's consoling my pain now, is that I know I'm heading in the right direction. I know I'm going where I need to go. So he goes there. This man who took him as a slave then sells him to a Jew. And this is a very important detail in the story of Salman. Hold on to this detail. This Jew was from the tribe of Bani Qurayza. Remember that name, Bani Qurayza. So this Jewish man from Bani Qurayza then buys Salman and he puts him to work in Medina in some of his gardens that are full of palm trees. He says, you have to work as a servant, as a slave. So he starts to work and he says, at this point I was still waiting for the Prophet because the Prophet has not even migrated yet to Medina. But he doesn't even know about anything because the word has not even gotten to Medina. He's working as a slave and he said, I didn't even know if this Prophet, his mission has begun yet or not. In these moments, I didn't even know, is this Prophet even born yet? Has he started yet? I have no idea. I just know he's going to come somewhere around here. Now, he doesn't know. 10 years, the Prophet is already started his message, probably even more. 13 years he's already started his message in Mecca. Yes? He says, one day I was up on the palm tree and I was harvesting the dates. You know, as they go up on the palm trees, they harvest the dates. He says, as I was up there, I heard a relative of my master came into the garden. And he started to speak very harshly about another tribe. He said, this other tribe, they're ruining everything for everyone in Arabia, because they are gathering around this man who says he's a prophet. They say he's a messenger of God. He says, my body started to shiver up there, and I got myself down. Now, this is a very interesting interaction that happened in the story of Salman. He says, I ran down to my master. I said, what is it that you're talking about? What's going on? He said, he punched me. He said, what are you talking about? You're a slave. Go work. How dare you ask me what's going on, what's not going on? You're here to work. But he was so eager. He was running as if he was a free man. He was like, I need to find out what's happening. They told him, listen, you're a slave. What are you talking about? Go. But he says, I continue to hear that this prophet has now come to Quba. Quba was an area outside of Medina. The prophet came there. He stayed there, and he was waiting in that area for none but Ali ibn Abi Talib to come with the Fawatim, to come with the other Fatimas that he was bringing from Mecca. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says, I went to Quba, and I begged my master for some dates. And he wanted to run this experiment now. He wanted to see, does this prophet have these, these traits and these signs? He said, fine, here, take these dates. I took the dates. I came to the prophet in Quba. I put the dates in front of him. I said, these dates are sadaqah, they're charity for you. And he says, the prophet looked at me, and the prophet, he smiled. He said, thank you very much. I won't eat from it, but you can eat from it. If you want to go ahead, you can go ahead, but I'm not going to eat from it. He said, inside of myself, I was talking to myself. That's sign number one. That's like the first sign they told me about him. Then he says, I changed my mind. I said, you know what? Fine. It's not charity. It's a gift for you. Would you take it as a gift? And he says, the prophet thanked me, and then he started to eat from this. I said, wow, this is sign number 2. But there was still a third sign Salman was looking for. And at this point, the prophet has now entered into Medina, and he's doing his basic things. He says one day he was in the graveyard of Baqi, and he was walking around, and I kept walking behind him to try to see that mark on his back. And he says he saw me walking around him, and he saw that I'm searching for something, and he knew what I was searching for, so he lowered his clothing a little bit, and I saw the mark between the two shoulder blades. And he says, in this moment, I broke down. And I started to cry, and I approached the prophet. And the prophet said, yes, I'm the messenger that you've been looking for. And then, according to some narrations, he told Salman to speak of his story to others. And some scholars say this is how the story even came about today. Salman entered into Islam like this. Forget about the trials and tribulations now he has to go through as a Muslim. This is the sacrifice he made to become Muslim. And you and I, God put this Islam into your hands and my hands. You and I, God didn't expect you to move from continent, to not have a family, to give up your wealth, to become a slave, to be freed, so on and so forth. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put this in your lap. And you and I still sit there, and I speak of myself, I say, Islam is very difficult. I have to wake up 5 o'clock when everyone else is asleep. I have to wake up. I have to do this Fajr prayer. How come everyone else gets to sleep? This is our mentality, right? How come I have to pray? How come fasting? Everyone else is having their McDonald's, but I can't eat. These are our issues. These were the issues Salman had. The problem was he was still a slave at this point. So the prophet devised a plan. Because amongst those things that the prophet legislated was the ability for a slave to write a contract with his master so that this slave would work towards freeing himself. And this is one of those things that Islam proposed. and the Prophet brought to the table, because before the Prophet was there, a servant or a slave had no rights at all. Just like we saw with Salman. He asked a question and he got punched. But when the Prophet came into the picture, amongst the rights that he granted to the servants, and I'm very hesitant, as you can see, to use even the word slave, because slave has a completely different, connotation to it. A completely different connotation to it. We hear the word slave, we think about the slavery that we had here in the US, which is amongst the worst in human history. It's very different with Islam. Very different with Islam. Separate topic. This is one of the examples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in Surah An-Nur and told the Muslimin that if you have servants and slaves, do mukatabah with them. Mukatabah is you sit down and write a contract that if you want to free yourself, this is the avenue that you can use. You work, and basically the result of your work is that you free yourself. And even if you can't find all of the money and all of the work to free yourself, if you work a little bit, then half of your time you're free. A fourth of your time you are free. And the more you do it, then it reaches a point where you are completely now a free individual. Those are the rights. Islam came into the picture and said, hey, these servants of yours, marry them to one another. Just say, they're just human beings. They don't even have, like, na'udhu billah, like animals. No. So you are to marry your single ones to one another. وَالصَّالِحِينَ مِنْ عِبَادِكُمْ وَإِمَائِكُمْ, and marry your servants. They have to have a life too. They have to have rights too. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them to do mukataba. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 33 of Surah An-Nur, He says, وَآتُوهُمْ مِنْ مَالِ اللَّهِ الَّذِي آتَاكُمْ, and give them from the wealth that God gave to you. You're the master? Wonderful. God gave you that wealth? You give your wealth to the slave. This is a different perspective than what the servants were dealing with before the Prophet came into the picture. Before the Prophet, the slave and the master could not even sit at the same table. And now Quran is saying you have to give him from your own wealth. No, you're my slave. What are you talking about? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed a lot of these things. So the Prophet told Salman, you have to do mukataba with your master. They sat down, they went through the negotiations. There were two main conditions. There was a certain amount of gold that he had to bring to the table. And then there was also 300 palm trees that he had to plant. Take the seeds, plant them, help them nourish. Then you are free. You get this work done, then you are free. And this is the point I want you to learn, and all of us, including myself, to learn from what the Prophet did. When the Prophet saw Salman in this situation, he turned to all the Muslimin. He said, you all have to free Salman. You all have a role to play. You have to help Salman. Now this same Salman, there will come a point later on where Salman will save all of these Muslims in his own way. But in order to reach that, in order to build that community, the Prophet said what? You all have to do what? You have to free Salman. And so what happened? All of these Muslims, they started to bring seeds that Salman could, he could plant. And then the Prophet himself helped him plant those seeds. I am going to help you get freed. This is what the Prophet taught us. I want to pause here for a second before we move on. The Prophet taught us that if you belong to a community, your immediate community, you have a duty towards it. You have to give back one way or another. The how and too much and in what way and in what avenue is a different discussion. You have to be giving back one way or another. You have a duty. I have a duty. I can't just sit there and say, I belong to this community, but I'm just not involved. No, if there's work that's being done, you have to support it. You have to be part of it. If you can be part of it directly, wonderful. If you can be part of it indirectly, wonderful. Some of these Muslimin, the only thing they did was they gave seeds for the palm trees to Salman because he couldn't even afford those. They gave him the seeds. Some of them, like the Prophet himself, he came and started to plant them himself. And this was also part of the seerah of the Prophet, that when he used to tell the Muslimin, you have to do this and you have to do that, he would come and help himself. When they were building the masjid in Quba, the narration says he carried these heavy bricks, so much so that he was, heavily and profusely sweating. That his relatives came to him and they said, Ya Rasulullah, you don't need to do this. Give it to us. Give us these bricks. These are these heavy bricks, not the small bricks, that we have today. They say, Ya Rasulullah, give it to us. Our hands are empty. And the Prophet said, if your hand is empty, go grab an extra one so we can build the masjid faster. This was the seerah of the Prophet. He told the Muslim, he said, Salman is your brother. Now you have to remember, Salman is Ajam. Salman is Persian. Salman technically is not part of us. And the Prophet said, no, you have to free him. We all have a duty. We all have a duty to give back. And then there was another condition outside of the palm trees was the gold that he had to put together. He was still stuck. He came to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, I don't have this gold. And the Prophet, while he was in the masjid, someone came and gave the Prophet some gold. Why? Because this person was dealing with a ma'adin. A ma'adin is an area you go where there are minerals, there are valuable things, right? You dig, for example, and you take them out. And a portion of it belongs to who? To the Prophet and his family and so on and so forth. He brought his portion for the Prophets. Think about like the financial dues that you and I pay today. Something similar to this. He was paying his financial due. He brought this to the Prophet. He gave the gold to Salman. He said, Salman, this is the gold that you were waiting for. Go free yourself. He said, Ya Rasulullah, this feels light. I don't think it's the amount that they need from me. And the Prophet told him, listen, if you go and weigh it, it will weigh more than the mountain of Uhud. Just go. You have my word, this is enough. He went, he weighed it, it's enough. And Salman now is a free man. But this is now, Salman has become a free man. This is where Salman and his status started to show itself. Recite a salawat, please. This status of Salman, his faith now starts to shine more and more. And amongst the characteristics that they mention for Salman are a number of things. One of them, or three of them, mentioned in a hadith from the sixth Imam. The narrator comes to the sixth Imam. He says, I hear you speaking of Salman all the time. Can you tell me more about Salman al-Farisi? Can you tell me more about Salman the Persian one? And the Imam said, I'll tell you more about him, but he's not Salman the Persian one. He said, first thing you have to fix is Salman al-Muhammadi. His name is Salman al-Muhammadi. He belongs to the beloved Prophet. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Then he continued, so I'll tell you why I speak of Salman so much. Number one, his first characteristic is that he never put the desire of himself ahead of the desire of his Imam. Everything, and you will see this in the seerah of Salman, everything he would ask for permission from the first Imam, from Ali ibn Abi Talib. He always do that. Number one. Number two, his second characteristic is that he would always value the poor over the rich. Give value to them. Number three, Salman was constantly learning. He was thirsty for knowledge. This is why I keep speaking of Salman so much. And now Salman has entered into this society. He feels like he belongs, but there are a lot of people who don't feel like he belongs. There's a lot of people, they're still sitting there and saying, I don't get it. This guy's not even amongst us. He's not even part of us. He's Persian. He shouldn't even be here. He doesn't even have a family here. So they used to get together and used to talk about their families. And when it came to Salman, Salman used to say, my family is Islam. I'm a child of Islam. And I was a slave and the Prophet, he freed me. That's all I know about my lineage. Of course, he knew his lineage. He was nobility. But he wouldn't speak about his lineage. So I'm a child of Islam. That's where I come from. And multiple occasions, the Arab of that time, they used to put Salman down. Say, they talk about the great companions of the Prophet, and they used to say, yeah, Salman, no, he's a convert. His faith is not. And the Imam turned to him, and he said, no, Salman is greater than these other guys you guys are talking about. He's a convert. Because he's a convert, his faith is greater. Happened on a number of times. And Salman now is slowly being more and more accepted into this society. It came a point where the Prophet now is going through battles. And because Salman has traveled the world, pretty much literally you could say, because the world at that time was not America. No, this stuff is only 200, 300 years old. The world at that time was the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire. That's all you had pretty much. You had other empires in Africa and so on and so forth, but the Persian and Roman Empire. And guess what? Salman had seen both. So the battle of Ahzab started to come around. The battle of Ta'if used to come around. And at every step, Salman was the one who could speak of tactics that no one else knew of. In the battle of Ta'if, he came to the Prophet. He said, Ya Rasulullah, they were surrounding a castle that they were trying to take over. He said, Ya Rasulullah, what you need here is a catapult. We have this in Persia. They used to use this. And if you don't use this, it's going to take forever. But if you use the catapult, and the Prophet was victorious, and he himself built the catapult for the Prophet. The battle of Khaybar came, or the battle of Khandaq, forgive me. Battle of Khandaq came, these Muslimin, they knew. This is, Battle of Khandaq has another name, yes? Battle of Ahzab, the battle of the parties. And inshallah, I'm very much looking forward to that day and opportunity where we have the time to discuss the Battle of Ahzab. Unbelievable history took place in this battle. The Battle of Ahzab, all these parties are coming together. It's called parties because everyone came together to put an end to Islam. It's like enough is enough. And in this battle, it was so critical that the Prophet was not only attacked from outside of Medina, even from inside Medina, there were those who betrayed the Prophet and attacked the Muslimin from inside. That's why the Quran says, on that day, you felt attacked from the bottom and the top. Like every corner, you're being attacked. They came, they had their consultation. This is where Salman brought it. He said, you have to have this khandaq. This is what we do in Persia. You have to have this khandaq. And this khandaq has to be long enough that the horses, they cannot jump over it. And parts of Medina had natural obstacles like mountains and so on and so forth. The parts that didn't have it, they had to build this khandaq. So they start to build this khandaq, and the Prophet has put different parts of this khandaq for different groups of people. Okay, Muhajirin, this tribe, you're going to do this part, and then you're going to do this part, and you're going to do this part. And Salman, because of his physical strength, everyone started to fight over him now. Everyone was saying, Salmanu minna. Salman's from us. And Ansar said, no, Salman is from us. They wanted to dig their thing faster. And the Prophet heard about this. And he came out. And he said, let me tell you something. Salman's not from you and he's not from you. Salmanu minna ahl al-bayt. He's like part of us. And it's very interesting. In the Sunni school of thought, this line is seen in just a very simple way. That the Prophet was trying to say he is neither from Muhajirin nor from Ansar. Like, I'm going to take him in. But when you look into our ahadith, you find that there is a much deeper meaning that the Prophet meant by this line. He wasn't just trying to say, well, Salman doesn't have anywhere to fit in, so we'll take him in. No, he was trying to say he's literally, from a spiritual perspective, close to where we are. And how do we know this? Because people used to come to the Imams and they used to ask the Imams these questions. Say, why is it that you guys say, Salmanu minna ahl al-bayt? They ask Ali ibn Abi Talib. Say, why do you say, Salmanu minna ahl al-bayt? He said, what can I tell you about the one who was created from the same dirt that I was created from? Like the origin, the essence, is the same thing. Not at that same level, but the origin and essence is the same thing. And when people used to come, the narration says this Arabi came, he was a Bedouin, he didn't care so much about, you're Ajam, I don't care about you. He came in and he shoved Salman aside and he went to the Prophet in the presence of the Prophet. And the Prophet got so upset, he said, listen, Arabi, do you know what you just did? He said, doesn't matter, he's Ajam, he's not one of us. And the Prophet said, listen, this man that you just shoved aside, this is the man that when Jibreel comes down from the skies, he tells me to send the salam of God to him. This is the one you pushed aside. And he is the one that whoever bothers him has bothered me. And whoever annoys him has annoyed me. And whoever disrespects him has disrespected me. This Salmanu minna ahl al-bayt had a much deeper meaning within the Shia understanding of it compared to the Sunni understanding of it. In the Sunni understanding, yes, the Prophet was always welcoming and took Salman in. From the Shia perspective, no, the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt were speaking about something that was far deeper than this. He's from that same origin and essence. Recite a salawat, please. So Salman now, of course, the Prophet is leaving this world. We know the role that Salman played after the Prophet's demise, especially when it came to Fatimyah. Just like we mentioned with Abu Dhar, the small group of people who were there with Ali ibn Abi Talib, when they gathered in his house to oppose the decision of Khilafah, Abu Dhar was there, Salman was also there. That was a key role that Salman played. And now time is passing on. The time of the second caliph came up. The time of the second caliph came up, you find that Abu Dhar and Salman have very different characters. Very different characters. They have the same values, but the way they do things is different. Abu Dhar speak truth. Abu Dhar, people just they're like, leave this guy alone. Yes, the Prophet said he'll die alone, he'll be resurrected alone, just his own thing. Salman though, which hadith says it seems as though he was at an even higher level, is that even though he had his values and even though he objected to the government at that time, where he felt like it was important for him to advance the cause of Islam as a whole, he would do it. And this is not an easy thing. Because if you believe what happened in Fatimiyah, from the Shia perspective, when the second caliph asks you to do something, it's going to be very difficult for you to accept. You'll be like, yeah, I don't know if I want to accept your command. And that is exactly what Salman did with the permission of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And not just Salman, this is what Ali ibn Abi Talib did himself. This is the sacrifice of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He sat there, he would give consultation to the Khulafa. We know Ali ibn Abi Talib was never part of any battle, but he gave consultation. And on one occasion, the Khalifa wanted to go to the battlefield. Ali ibn Abi Talib told him, no, you can't go. Why? Because he agrees with this person? No, because the cause of Islam as a whole is going to be at danger. So the second caliph sends an army to take over the city of Madain. This is in Iraq. This city of Madain was the capital of the Persian Empire at that time. So this is a big step the Muslimin are taking. The promise that the Prophet gave to the Muslimin when they were digging the Khandaq, that one day you'll take over Rome and you'll take over Persia. This is now happening. But it's happening during the time of the second caliph. He puts this army together, and part of that army, Salman goes with the permission of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he plays a very critical role because he's probably the only one who can speak the language of those that he's going to war with. And the narration says, when things became difficult and the soldiers on the other side were resisting, Salman would go and speak to them. And he would say, listen, this is going to happen. This is the will of Allah. But he would speak in their mother tongue. He would speak in their native tongue. So what happens? Madain finally falls to the Muslimin. Madain was not a joke. Madain was a big deal. And the reason why it was such a big deal was its name. Madain means the cities. It wasn't even one city. 7 cities that were close to each other. This was the capital of the empire at that time. Who was ruling there? The same guy that when the Prophet wrote a letter, if you remember early on in the life of the Prophet, he wrote a letter to who? To the kings of the different empires around him. He wrote a letter to the head of the Persian Empire. His name was Khusro Parviz. Where did Khusro Parviz live? In the city of Madain. This is where his palace was. This is now you're entering into like a grand civilization. And when the Prophet wrote this letter, just so you understand the importance of Madain and the importance of it falling with the help of Salman. When the Prophet wrote this letter to Khusro Parviz, the messenger of the Prophet did not even get to the end of the letter. This guy, he grabbed the letter of the Prophet, he tore it up into pieces. And he said, you go back and tell Muhammad I'm coming for him. And then he sent people from his own empire to go and arrest the Prophet. It's 180 degrees. And those people came to arrest the Prophet. And they said, Muhammad, we have come because the head of Persia wants you. You know what the Prophet told them? The Prophet said, who are you working for? That head of Persia, that king of Persia, last night, you guys don't know, his son killed him. And they went back and they realized that Khusro Parviz is already dead. This is who was ruling in Madain. Madain was a big deal. Madain finally falls. And the second caliph puts who in charge of it? None but Salman al-Farisi. Salman goes to Madain. As he approaches Madain, people are glad, people are happy, they are welcoming him into the city. They say, Salman, the palace is ready for you. You can go and live in the palace. And Salman says, you know what? I'm not going to live in the palace. He says, Salman, you're the governor now. You know, be just and be nice and all that kind of, but you got to live in the you got to live in the palace. He said, that's not a place I'm going to live. And the narrations, historical narration says that he used to go from one corner to another corner of the city. And that he didn't have a main residence while he was in Madain until one point came where people came to him. They said, Salman, let us build for you a house. And he said, well, tell me, how big is this house? They said, the house is not going to be big. Don't worry about it. It's just only big enough that when you stand, your head will almost hit the ceiling. And when you sleep, it's like almost as if it's your only the amount of room you need for you to be able to lie down. He said, fine, if you want to build me that. This is the Sahaba of the Prophet. This is why we speak highly of these Sahaba, because they carried that essence of the message of the Prophet. This is how many years after? This is 20 years after the Prophet has passed away. But he's an ambassador of the culture that the Prophet brought to the table. He used to sit, they had 5,000 dirhams for him as part of Baytul Mal. Take this is your monthly thing. And he said he wouldn't take it. And he would sit and he would make his own money. He would take the leaves of these palm trees, he would sew them into baskets, and he would sell them. This is the governor of Madain. This is the Sahaba of the Prophet. And amongst those individuals that Salman had a very close relationship with was none but the person that we commemorate during these days and nights. And that was Fatimah al-Zahra, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And there are multiple narrations of the interactions that Salman had with Fatimah, and you could tell that Salman and Fatimah, these are very dear and near towards one another. Because Salman at this point is a very old man. They've mentioned different ages. Some have said around 100. A very old man. And of course, Lady Fatimah al-Zahra is a very young one. It's almost like a old man and this young woman. And there are multiple interactions that they had. Amongst those interactions was the one where Ali ibn Abi Talib came to Salman. He said, Salman, go to the house of Fatimah. Go to my house because Fatimah has something prepared for you. He went to the house of Fatimah. He entered and Fatimah said, listen, I have these gifts from heaven. There are 3 gifts. They were 3 heavenly beings. And the first one introduced himself. He says, my name is Salma. I am created for Salman. And the second one said, my name is Dharra. I am created for Abu Dhar. Third one said, my name is Maqduda. I am created for Miqdad. And Lady Fatima told her, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared for you. And she gave him heavenly dates. He says, I walked away from the house with these dates. And as I was walking, the smell of these dates was so much. People used to come across me. They used to say, Salman, you're carrying perfume with you or something. He used to go to the house of Fatima. This relationship was a very close relationship. And amongst those times where you see the love and affection that Salman had for Lady Fatima was that time where he came to the house of Fatima and he knocked on the door and he entered and he saw Fatima is working. And as Fatima was working, the clothing that she was wearing was so simple, it was so modest that it made him cry because it had patches on it. And it was a very, very simple and modest clothing. And Fatima asked him and said, why is it that you're crying? He said, I cry because you're the daughter of the Prophet. This is the way you're living. And then there are kings, and go and look at the way the daughters of those kings live. King of Persia, the king of Rome. And then what happened? He came to the Prophet and Lady Fatima came with the Prophet. And then Lady Fatima said, oh, father of mine, Salman is surprised at the way we live. Salman almost can't digest the simplicity that we have in our life. But let me tell you, Salman, there have been multiple days where me and Ali, we just sleep on a little piece of the skin of sheep. We don't even have a place to live. We don't have a place to sleep. This is the simplicity and the relationship that Salman had with Lady Fatima. There came those times, the final moments of the life of Salman, and now he is leaving this world. He turned to the person who would help him with his affairs, and this person said, well, Salman, you're leaving this world. It's about time. The narration says he started to cry. And they asked him, he said, Salman, you have nothing to worry about. If anyone has anything to worry about, you have nothing to worry about. You're going to be fine. You're going to go enter upon the Hawd Kawthar. Prophet is waiting for you. And he said, I don't cry because I have fear of death. I cry because I didn't do what the Prophet told me to do. I didn't carry out his teaching fully. They said, which teaching is this? He said, the Prophet told us. Who is us? This inner circle. Imagine how much they miss the Prophet at this point. Imagine how much they just want to see the Prophet. 20 years after the Prophet is gone. But this inner circle has kept its faith so much. They've been through so much, but they've kept their faith so much. He said, the Prophet, my Habib, had taught me this lesson, that I come into this world and I leave this world just like a traveler. I only take as much as a traveler needs on his trip. How much wealth do you need? You take your house with you, you take your car with you, take everything. No, you don't do all that. You just take enough that you can get through. He said, this is what the Prophet told me. But I'm walking away from life and I'm taking too many things with me. And the narrator says, I looked in this house and I saw nothing. But he said, I still haven't fully done this. His servant asked him, said, Salman, who's going to come to do the ghusl and kafan? How are we going to do this? He said, the same one who did the ghusl and kafan of the Prophet is going to come and do my ghusl and kafan as well. And Salman is where now? Madain. And Ali ibn Abi Talib is where now? Medina. He said, he is the one who's going to come and do my ghusl and kafan. They said, it's not possible. He said, no. He's given me this promise. He will come. And he said, by the time that you close the knot to my kafan, Ali ibn Abi Talib will be here to pray on my body. And his servant says, this is exactly what I did. And before I knew it, Ali ibn Abi Talib and Qambar, his servant, were there with him. And Ali ibn Abi Talib stood by the body of Salman. And he said, O servant of Allah, what a great servant you were. How much did you obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Until finally, Salman is buried in the land of Madain. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq to be, inshaAllah, amongst the true followers of the lifestyle, the life and legacy of the likes of Salman. Sallallahu alayka ya Fatimah al-Zahra. Sallallahu alayki ya binta Rasulullah. Let's take our hearts, brothers and sisters, to the city of Medina, this city of gham, the city of sorrow, the city of sadness, this city that was once the city of happiness. Now after the Prophet has gone, all of the masa'ib and all of this oppression has now started to make its way towards the family of the Ahlul Bayt. Salman was crying just at the sight of seeing the type of clothing and the simple lifestyle of Fatima. What would have Salman done when he saw in those moments what happened to Fatima to Zahra? What would have Salman done when he saw Ali ibn Abi Talib going through all of the difficulties and all of the masa'ib and all of the trials and tribulations? What would have Salman done on the 10th of Muharram when he saw the grandson of the Prophet going through what Hussein went through? The narrations say that on this final day, Ali ibn Abi Talib had gathered around the body of the Prophet when the Prophet was leaving this world in his final days. The narrations say at one point, the Prophet took the hand of Ali and took the hand of Fatima and put them into one another, and he said, Ya Ali, Ya Abul Hasan, hadihi wadi'atullah. This is the amana of Allah. This is the trust that I am entrusting you with. You take care of my Fatima. You protect my Fatima. I am leaving this part of myself with you, Ya Ali. The narration says Ali ibn Abi Talib, with a little bit of strength that he had, he put Fatima into the grave and he started to pour dirt on the body of Fatima. What happened to the heart of Ali in these moments? What went through the heart of Ali ibn Abi Talib in these moments? Until that point came where he finally, his chest, his heart was so full of pain, he turned towards the haram of the Prophet. He turns towards the grave of the Prophet, and he just started to speak to the Prophet and took a look at the pain that the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib carry with himself. He turned toward the Prophet. He said, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah. My salam goes to you, O Prophet of Allah, anni, from myself, wa an ibnatika nazilati fi jiwarik, and from that daughter of yours that is now joining you. Imagine the tears falling from the face of Ali ibn Abi Talib. There is so much he wants to share with the Prophet. There is so much that he wants to speak of, the masa'ib that Fatimah has gone through, but he's also embarrassed to tell the Prophet what Fatimah has gone through. Then he starts to speak. He says, Ya Rasulullah, let me tell you that now that I have lost Fatimah, raqqa anha tajalludi. Ya Rasulullah, this pain that I'm going through, my patience is wearing thin. I can't do it anymore. I can't carry this burden anymore. This is Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is the strong warrior who could lift the gate of Khaybar. But now he's saying, when you took Fatima away from me, you are now breaking my back. There is no more strength that I carry with myself. He said, وَرَقَّ عَنْهَا تَجَلُّدِي. Ya Rasulullah, it is so painful for me, these moments where I'm giving up Fatima. And then he continued, he said, فَلَقَدْ اسْتُرْجِعَتِ الْوَدِيعَ. Ya Rasulullah, this is that amana that you had given to me. This is that trust that you had entrusted me with. I am now returning her back to you. But Ya Rasulullah, فَأَحْفِهَا السُّؤَالِ. Ya Rasulullah, ask Fatima what they did to her after you were gone. Ask Fatima the masa'ib and the oppression that she went through. Ask her what they did when they came to the house of Fatima. Ask her about the disrespect. Ya Rasulullah, I'm embarrassed to tell you. I cannot even tell you of what Fatima went through during those moments of her life. He says, finally, I am returning the wadi'ah of the Prophet back to you. And then he continued and he said, let me tell you, Ya Rasulullah, now that your daughter is not with me anymore, and I don't have my backbone with me anymore, let me tell me, amma huzni fasarmadun. My sadness will never end after this day. My sadness will always be there with me after this day. Wa amma layli فَمُسَهَّدٌ. And let me tell you, I will never sleep the nights like I used to sleep when Fatima was with me. I have lost that backbone. Fatima was the one, whenever Ali ibn Abi Talib had any difficulty, he used to look at the face of Fatima, and this face of Fatima used to take away all of the worries and all of the concerns of Fatima, of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And now Ali ibn Abi Talib has lost his backbone. He has lost that one person that he used to rely on. All of the difficulties on one hand, losing Fatima on the other hand. He said, this nights of mine, they are going to be sleepless nights from now on. And my sadness, this sadness of mine, is never going to end after this, Ya Rasulullah. Then imagine Ali ibn Abi Talib gave his final salams to the Prophet. He starts to make his way. Imagine this old man making his way now towards his house in the middle of the night. Where are the Muslimin to come and console Ali ibn Abi Talib? Where are the people to come and comfort his pain? Ali doesn't want anything to have to do with these people. Ali ibn Abi Talib, in the darkness of the night, with his orphans, are now walking back towards this house that doesn't have a mother anymore. I don't know if you've been to a house where the mother is gone, where the mother is absent. You can imagine the pain. You can imagine the absence that you feel in this house, the heaviness that you feel in the air of this house. This is what Ali ibn Abi Talib is returning back to. Imagine as he takes the hands of his Aitam, his Hassan, his Hussein, his Zainab, his Kulthum, and now they walk back to this house that one day Fatima used to walk in. One day Fatima used to live there. One day Fatima used to smile in this house. But of course, the masa'ib after the Prophet have taken Fatima away from him, and he doesn't have Fatima with him anymore. Imagine what happened to the hearts of Ali ibn Abi Talib as every day goes by and Fatima is not with him to help him through the difficulties of his life. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawmi al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq to be amongst the true followers of the Ahlul Bayt, insha'Allah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those who are dealing with difficulty, with pain, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees them from their difficulty and pain, inshaAllah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those who have given from their wealth, their time, their effort to allow us to hold these majalis, this majlis, any other majlis, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, blesses their efforts and prolongs their lives. And finally, last but not least, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He hastens the return of our beloved 12th Imam. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat, especially the marhumin and marhumat of the sponsors of tonight's program. And please remember in your du'as all of those families who have asked for iltimas du'a during these days and nights by the right of Fatimah, وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the right of Fatimah and her family that all of those who are dealing with difficulty, with pain, all of those who are dealing with loss, multiple losses we've had recently in our community. A family reached out today whose relative is dealing with cancer. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes these difficulties and these calamities easy on all of these families. Let's recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat, especially the marhumin and marhumat of the sponsors of tonight's program. Bin Nabiyyi wa alih, rahimallahu man qara'a Surah Al-Fatihata ma'a as-salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है। क्या हाल ये उम्मत ने ज़हरा का बनाया है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है। खातून कोई गम से यूं चूर नहीं देखी, ऐसी कोई दुनिया में मस्तूर नहीं देखी। 18 बरस में ही, 18 बरस में ही लगती जो ज़ईफ़ा है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी। दरबार में जालिम के की ऐसी पजीराई, किस तरह से तू बीबी फिर लौट के घर आई। बालों की सफ़ेदी ने, बालों की सफ़ेदी ने सब हाल सुनाया है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है, तुर्बत भी। तू रोती रही घर में حیدر سے بھی چھپ چھپ کے عصمت کی طرح دکھ بھی پردے میں رہے تیرے، کچھ درد تیرے بی بی، کچھ درد تیرے بی بی، بس جانتی فضا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے۔ دو ایسے جنازے ہیں تاریخ میں جو اٹھے، بس گھر کے ہی لوگوں نے دونوں کو دیے کاندھے، ایک فاطمہ زہرا ہے، ایک فاطمہ زہرا ہے، ایک بالی سکینہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکست۔ مرہم تیرے زخموں کا بی بی نہ ملا اب تک، اولاد امیہ کی باقی ہے جفا اب تک، رونے پہ بھی پہرا ہے، رونے پہ بھی پہرا تھا، تربت پہ بھی پہرا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے۔ کیا حال یہ امت نے، کیا حال یہ امت نے زہرا کا بنایا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے۔ یا حسین، یا حسین، یا حسین، یا حسین، یا حسین، پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ متوجہ زیارت۔
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل